Hey y'all, welcome back to Miniature Game Montage. I am Jimmy, and I love dice games, and I love making your decisions. You roll the dice, and then you have to live or deal with whatever they give you. So when I sat down to play Moonstone and discovered that it was primarily card-driven, it is not something that I thought I would like, and that is probably why in the past I had looked it over. But I had an absolute blast. I played my first game yesterday with a local friend from Imperial Minis, and I'll put a link in the description for his channel. I do highly recommend checking it out. He was kind enough to let me use his miniatures and teach me the game. And there were several points during the game that I had to take a step back, and I said, I really like this, or this is a really clever mechanic. So today I want to talk about Moonstone and why I think it's such a cool game and why it deserves a lot more attention. Now, if you're unfamiliar, Moonstone is a whimsical fantasy skirmish-based game by Goblin King Games, and the miniatures are fantastically designed. I'll admit that cute is not really a word that I use a lot in my normal vocabulary. I just don't say cute a lot, but I don't know how else to say what these miniatures are except they're just cute. You've got goblins, ogres, trolls, humans, undead, fairies, tree people, and all kinds of strange creatures that are running around a 3x3 battlefield attempting to collect moonstones before the sun comes up and they disappear. And that's actually one thing that I found a little bit interesting about the game, is it's not about destroying your opponent, it's simply about getting more moonstones than they have before the game is over. The game takes place over 4 turns, and as the sun starts to rise at the end of the 4th turn, you've got to get those valuable moonstones to people that can use them, or they disappear. And that in itself creates a really interesting dynamic, because you not only have to deal with your opponent, but you have to find out how your troop or your warband synergizes to get to those moonstones and get them out of the earth and then protect them. Now, before we get to the rules, I do want to talk about the miniatures and just take a really close look at them. And my friend over at Imperial Minis, you can tell that he is an absolutely fantastic painter, and this is how I wish that I could paint my miniatures. These miniatures have so much character. They are kind of similar to Relic Blade that I've covered here in the past. You can tell that they are someone's artistic vision brought to life, and they just look so cool. The miniatures just aren't generic fantasy troops, they are miniatures that look like and feel like characters. You look at them and just kind of immediately start imagining kind of where they came from and what kind of story they're going to tell, or what kind of ridiculous situation they're going to get themselves into. And that fits the game perfectly. Now, for Imperial Minis, he does have some Moonstone content on his channel, as well as some A Song of Ice and Fire, which we don't cover on this channel, but I found a lot of his content to be extremely rewarding, and again, I do highly recommend checking it out and giving him a sub. Now, for the game itself and the mechanics, it's played on a 3x3, and the first thing that you need to do is drop the moonstones, which is a lot of fun. There's 7 of them, and you drop them from about a foot off the table and let them randomly spread. Each character can get a mulligan or a do-over if you don't happen to like the way that they're spread out, but really just drop the moonstones until both players agree that that looks pretty good. The moonstones are D4, and they'll have a value at the top that tells you the depth or how hard it's going to be to harvest those moonstones, which was a really cool mechanic. You then deploy your characters and start to devise your plan of how you're going to get to those moonstones and harvest them before your opponent does. And one of the ways that you're going to do that is with using your energy, which is kind of the backbone of the game. And your energy can be used for different things, such as to get an additional move or a step. They can be used to do a melee attack or an arcane power, or to harvest those moonstones. And a lot of times there comes down to a lot of critical decisions, like which action are you going to do? Am I going to attempt to harvest this moonstone, or do I need to help a friend fend off an enemy somewhere else? During my playthrough, I never felt there was a decision that I was making that was not meaningful, and I think that's important. During our game, I was constantly surveying the battlefield and trying to figure out if I needed to do something differently. I found myself asking, is this the most valuable thing that I can do with my character right now? And then there was the cards, and as I mentioned, this is kind of what put me off about this game prior to giving it a chance. And to be frank, there's quite a bit of text on the cards, and there's different ways that your warband or your troop can synergize. Each character has their own specific abilities and ways that they can work with others. And there's definitely a learning curve, but I found myself picking it up pretty quickly and just enjoying the hell out of it. And the more I played it, the more that I started to appreciate the way that the card system was designed, because it's not about just living with what the results give you. You're thinking about what cards you have in your hand, and you're also trying to think about what cards your opponent may have in their hand and what they can play. You're essentially trying to anticipate what they're going to do, and then there's also a bluffing mechanic. So if you're trying to cast an arcane spell, for example, you can say that you have a color and a number, and your opponent can call a bluff and say, hey look, do you really have that card or not? If your opponent calls your bluff and they play a catastrophe, things can go pretty bad for the caster or whoever is trying to create this arcane spell or something else. It's interesting because you're not just thinking about rules at that point, you're thinking about how to maybe read your opponent and think about what they may be up to. And suddenly this little skirmish game that was happening started to become almost like a psychological mini-game that was happening inside of the game itself, and that was really cool. Now, the combat system is also card-driven, and is very different from anything else that I've ever seen. Instead of simply rolling dice and saying, hey look, I hit, I wound, and now you roll saves, the different cards that you could potentially play felt like real strikes in combat. You could choose a thrust, or a sweeping blow, or a rising strike, but you also had to think about what your opponent may potentially play. They might respond with a high guard, a low guard, or a falling strike, and each combination will do different damage to them as well as damage to you. So every combat was almost kind of like a rock, paper, scissors kind of format, but it felt very rewarding. I found myself often thinking, what would I play if I was him, and how would I counter it? Overall, it was just a lot of fun, and it was one of those moments where I said, hey look, this feels like a real combat is taking place, and that was really neat. Now, I don't want to pretend that Moonstone is completely effortless to learn, and there's a lot of text on the cards, as I mentioned. When I was first getting started, I did find myself kind of reading over passive and active abilities and trying to figure out how the characters would synergize and who I want to activate first. But after I had a basic understanding of kind of how those worked in the first turn and a half or so, I was pretty much ready to make my own decisions. And how characters work together, I think, is something that is really special about the game as well. If you're a list builder, then this is certainly a game that would appeal to you, but it does feel like, at least in what we played, and from what I've heard in general, that the characters are well balanced as well. There is no traditional point system, you just simply pick the 6 or so characters, or how many that you and your opponent agree to play as, and from a certain faction, and then you are good to go. And that gives you quite a bit of freedom, and after playing my first game, I was just genuinely surprised by how much fun I had. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, is I went into the game like knowing that I was going to play with miniatures, but no dice and card-based. I just was not expecting the game to be what it was, and I have to say that I really enjoyed it. I think that you know that a game is done particularly well when you genuinely don't care if you win or lose, because you're just having fun, and things are happening around the battlefield, and even though it's happening adversely to you, it doesn't really matter because it's just fun. And throughout my playthrough yesterday, I started to discover these little interactions between characters that made me want to come back and play again to see what I could do differently. And that's exactly where I'm at with Moonstone right now, is I want to play it again. Overall, I'm incredibly thankful that Goblin King Studios sent me a 2-player starter set to kind of help me get along in this journey. It's so hard when you play the amount of games that we do to invest in games and continue to bring them to the forefront. And I can honestly say, after playing the game, that I want to play more, and I would like to feature some battle reports on the channel. The miniatures are fantastic and full of character, the mechanics of the game feel really good. There's definitely a learning curve, but I found myself getting into the game surprisingly quickly. But most importantly, I had fun, and I think that's really what playing miniature games should be about. Whether you win or lose, you walk away from the table just thinking that was a really good time. Time well spent. And that was the feeling that I had yesterday when I left the table. So I will put a link for Goblin King Games and Moonstone down in the description below, and I'll also put a link for Imperial Minis. I would really like for you to check his channel out and consider subscribing. I think with a little convincing, we can get his beautiful miniatures back on the channel, and we can do a proper battle report and maybe even a campaign. And honestly, I would really like to do that. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Have you ever played Moonstone? Is it a game that you have ever considered? I look forward to reading your comments. Supporters Club, your names are on the screen now. That is by no means necessary. If you've watched the video this far, you've done more than enough to support the channel. So thank you so much. We will see you in the next one. Take care.